So we're going to talk about the Toureg Adin implant. So Adin create or manufacture a number of implants. The particular implant we're going to focus on is the Toureg S. They also make the Toureg OS and a number of other implants across the range, close fit, unifit, and various others. But we're just going to focus on the Toureg S range. We're going to talk about the macro features, the micro features, the potential indications, and then later on in some other videos we may go through how you open the implant up, so you connect it, does come in mounted and unmounted, and then how you'll undo that sterile and pop that into the patient. So this implant is a bone level implant. It is a grade 5 titanium, so it's alloyed with aluminium and vanadium at 6%, so commercially pure. The S version itself is aluminate silicate blasted, and then it's acid etched, so it has that sort of SLA surface to roughen that up. And then if you differentiate that with the OS system, then, which is, they term it the Osseo Fix, then they use calcium phosphate to blast on the surface. It's sold again as an implant that can be used in numerous situations, and again, because of its design, can be used in immediate situations as well. Coming back to some of the bigger features, it has an internal connection, and that connection feature, there's no Morse taper. That's for the close fit conical connection, so it doesn't have that feature. And we discussed that in the Straumann bone level tapered implant design, which did have that Morse taper conical connection, and it has a hex on the inside. So there are various different connections on various different implants, and this one has that hex design on the internal connection, which has that anti-rotational effect. The head shape itself is straight, so it's got this nice straight head shape, and there is some micro threading on this particular implant. And the idea or the principle behind the micro threading is so that we get some bone integrity around the top. We're not losing that bone in theory. So the bone is able to integrate to that implant surface. And that's probably for another video in itself, talking about micro threading. The general body shape of the implant is, it's a fully tapered implant, and the threads are actually square. I've seen some identification websites where they've reported the thread shape as being V-shape, I think, but actually it is a square thread, which means that there is greater bone to implant contact when you compare that design with a V-shape or a buttress design. And there are differences on the actual stresses that induces on the bone in terms of its compression, shear forces, and tensile forces. So each thread design has its advantages and disadvantages. And there's a higher reverse torque with a square thread when we compare that to the V-shaped or the buttress or reverse buttress designs. There are two threads on this particular implant, and both of them are leading threads, and they are 1.2 millimeters. So you could class this as a slightly aggressive style of implant. Certainly isn't a passive style. Probably more aggressive than the BLT. You can certainly change direction with this implant fairly easily. It has an apical groove, and the apex itself is curved or has a dome shape to it. There are no holes in the apical portion, and the connection shape across all the ranges, all the different sizes of the implant, are 3.5 diameter. So the hex driver for this prosthetic connection, it's a 1.27 millimeter hex driver that connects to the prosthetic connection. And when you compare that to the Megagen and the Austin, that's a 1.20 millimeter connection, and the Southern is a 1.22 or a 1.27. So the Southern is very similar to the Adin connection. And if you're looking at some of the Southern literature, you can actually use the 1.22 in the 1.27 and it'll fit and it'll work. So in theory, your Megagen, Ostem, Southern drivers will fit and work with your Adin prosthetic connection, but it's always better to actually use the manufacturer's own drivers. And therefore, if you are sort of torquing up, you're not damaging that screw head, because that's the last thing you want to do. But just be aware that if you are in a bit of a struggle, then there are, if you have got more drivers in your kit, they may fit. And should you need them, then they can get you out of a situation where you might find something sticky, or your driver's in the autoclave, and you're in that emergency situation, which hopefully will never happen. There are variations in the width, obviously, across the range, and variations in the lengths. Starting off at 3.5, then we've got 3.75 diameters, 4.2, 5, and 6. And then lengths from 8 millimeters going up to 18 millimeters, with a 10, 11.5, 13, 16, and 18 across the range. With the 4.2 to the 5 and the 6 actually starting at a slightly smaller length of implant, so you can get that one in a 6.25 length, whereas that's not available in the slightly smaller diameters, 3.75 and 3.5, for various reasons. Really, you need that length. If you're going to reduce the diameter, then really you need a slightly longer length implant. In theory, it's just physics and mechanics and the way that things work. Indications for this implant. Well, Adin sort of regard this implant as a fairly, well, a workhorse, I guess you'd call it. It works, it can be loaded immediately, and it works in all types of bone. In my experience, I've had no issues with this particular implant in all sorts of situations. I've used it in softer bone, and I've used it in fairly dense bone as well. And it certainly is a fairly aggressive implant. It certainly will grab that bone, and you need to be careful that it's not changing direction. So you need to make sure you're keeping it on course. And probably one of the features that when I first started using it was actually that getting it into the osteotomy without too much tension, I was finding that I was reversing the implant and backing it in the bank quite a lot. So you have to just prepare the site a little bit more, but be careful not to over prepare the site. In the standard kit, there is no tap with this particular kit, and when you look at the kit, you'll have the tri drill, I think they call it, and this is an excellent little drill. So it has a diamond point on the first drill as you're stepping through, creating your osteotomy, and then you go to your sort of pilot, and then you can come back to your tri-step drill and drill down to depth, and that tri-step drill will guide your next or your final drill through. So it has sort of the tri-step, as in 3 kind of steps to what it's actually doing. Very, very useful drill. But just be a little bit mindful when you first start, if using this implant system, that you need to prepare correctly. Don't be afraid to go back in and just re-prep if you're finding that you're over torquing, because you don't want to be torquing any greater than really 40 Newton centimeters. and you can get quite a lot of force onto this implant to actually pop it in with those aggressive threads and that compression that it causes on the bone. So just make sure you've got a nice, fairly passive, good primary stability, obviously, when you can achieve it, but a fairly passive fit. So you're not over torquing that bone, and therefore you're not going to get bone loss around the neck of the implant. So we'll move on to other videos showing you the unpacking of the box. So it comes in mounted or unmounted. Commonly I'll use unmounted, and I'll actually use what's in the kit to mount onto the implant. I just have a preference for that, but the mounted system is fine as well.